Welcome to Podkey Daily News, your fast brief on the stories with real-world consequences. France just got a major election shakeup, NATO is being pushed toward a far bigger defense bill, and the U.S. Iran confrontation is back in a dangerous place. The common thread is leverage, legal leverage, military leverage, and energy route leverage. Marine Le Pen appears to have cleared the biggest immediate obstacle to another presidential run after an appeals court reduced or lifted the multi-year ban tied to her embezzlement conviction. Some reports put the remaining ineligibility at 15 months, already elapsed, which would effectively restore her eligibility for the next contest. The court still left her with a 1-year suspended sentence and electronic monitoring, and that matters because it creates a bizarre modern reality. A top candidate may be legally allowed to run while also campaigning under an ankle tag condition. Le Pen says she'll appeal to France's highest court to overturn both the conviction and the monitoring requirement, so the legal fight is no longer background noise. It's becoming part of the campaign itself. For National Rally, the dilemma is straightforward. Keep Le Pen front and center and use the victimization argument to energize the base, or shift more weight to Jordan Bardella, the 30-year-old heir apparent, to avoid practical restrictions and reassure less ideological voters. What to watch is whether the party treats Bardella as insurance or starts treating him as the cleaner vehicle. At the NATO summit in Ankara, the core fight was money. Allies discussed moving beyond the old 2% of GDP defense benchmark towards something much closer to 5% over time. President Trump's pressure campaign was explicit: spend more or face consequences, including renewed threats to pull U.S. troops from Europe. That gives this summit real practical stakes. European governments are being pushed to commit not just to headline percentages, but to long-cycle industrial output, air defense, munitions, and procurement that can actually show up in the field. Officials talked about a transatlantic defense industrial revolution, and allies rolled out multi-billion-dollar projects including interceptor systems, but contracts are not capabilities. Most of this takes months or years to turn into usable equipment. Turkey came out stronger from hosting. Its military weight, control of the Turkish Straits, and role in Black Sea access give Ankara bargaining power that the rest of the alliance can't easily ignore. That helps explain why allies seemed more willing to mute criticism of Erdogan's domestic record. Keeping Turkey aligned is strategically useful, and Trump publicly underscored that by praising Erdogan and tying his own attendance to Turkey's role. The next thing to watch is whether the summit produces binding spending paths or just another round of expensive promises. The sharpest immediate security risk is in the Gulf. The U.S. launched large-scale strikes on more than 80 Iranian targets, including air defense systems, saying it was retaliating for attacks linked to Iran on commercial vessels. Washington also revoked a waiver that had allowed Iran to sell oil under a previous memorandum, effectively tightening sanctions again after IRGC missile and drone activity near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's response was pointed. Its military said only routes designated by Tehran should be considered safe passage for commercial shipping, and warned of a crushing response to U.S. interference. That's why markets are paying attention even without a full oil shock. Yet Brent moved toward the low 70s, which is not panic pricing. But it does signal rising concern that a maritime confrontation could squeeze flows through one of the world's most sensitive energy choke points. What matters next is whether this stays in the signaling phase or spills into direct disruption of shipping lanes, because that's the step that would hit energy markets and insurance costs much harder. On the NATO sidelines, Volodymyr Zelensky pushed for U.S. export licenses that would let Ukraine or European partners produce Patriot PAC-3 missiles domestically or in Europe. The reason is simple. Ukraine is trying to close a ballistic missile defense gap against Russia, and imported supply alone is not enough. The obstacle is technology transfer. Officials made clear there was no immediate licensing decision expected in Ankara, so this remains more strategic ambition than near-term supply relief. Nigel Farage has made a high-risk, high-visibility move by resigning as MP for Clacton-on-Sea to trigger a by-election he describes as a people versus establishment fight, while saying he'll stand again. The move lands at a moment when Reform UK has surged in polling, with some reports showing it climbing from roughly 15% to around 30%, turning it from protest vehicle into a direct threat to both labor and the conservatives. But this is not a clean populist momentum story. Farage is also facing investigations over alleged failures to declare gifts, donations, and benefits reportedly worth millions of pounds. So the by-election could become both a strength test and a referendum on whether anti-establishment energy can outrun campaign finance scrutiny. One technology story worth watching closely: Meta is reportedly prototyping always-on AI glasses that capture audio and photos and store metadata for later queries while planning to drop the current LED recording indicator. The practical problem is obvious. If a device is always listening or intermittently capturing without a visible signal, bystanders have no realistic way to consent, and in some U.S. states that may collide with two-party consent laws. This is where consumer AI is heading fastest into legal friction, because the hardware use case depends on ambient capture, and the social license for ambient capture is still thin. In China, severe rains and floods are turning into an infrastructure story as much as a disaster story. A landslide in Gansu killed 21 workers. Floods in Guangxi forced about 130,000 evacuations, and water levels at 341 dams reached emergency status. The PLA and rescue teams have been deployed, but the bigger concern is cumulative strain. Continued climate-driven storms can turn local emergencies into broader failures if dams and flood control systems are pushed past design limits. That's the brief for today. French election math, NATO burden sharing, Gulf shipping risk, and a few pressure points worth keeping on your radar. You're listening to Podkey Daily News. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.